as Catherine said, my main job is running the Cambridge Digital Library, which essentially is a combination of a lot of images and a lot of text. Text of various kinds, descriptive text, transcriptions of works, translations of works, etc. The Digital Library is a highly collaborative platform. It's essentially born out of research on collections. So we work with lots of different projects who produce text and who use text and who produce and use text in the context of image collections. And today I'm just going to kind of examine some of the interactions between text and image that come up in these collaborations, come up in these projects. So I'm going to kind of slightly ventriloquize, I suppose, some of the projects we work with, and look at essentially the way we look at text in the context of images, in the context of the presence of images, but also the way we create and use text in relation to images. And as Catherine said, I'm going to talk in particular about IIIF, which is the International Image Interoperability Framework. Not a particularly easy thing to say, which essentially is a standard for making images available and sharing images online. And particularly, I'm going to look at the effect it's had on projects which work with text, but also to touch on how some of the same processes we use for IIIF might also be applied to text, and how that might have a kind of effect on the field of textual analysis as it has had on the field of image analysis. So to get started, so I'm going to be straying a bit from the early modern context in this presentation, but I am going to start at least in the modern period with the papers of Isaac Newton. And I'm going to start with, I suppose, the simple effect of images being displayed alongside text. So particularly in an era where there's a kind of increasingly digitized digital images are becoming ubiquitous all over the place. So one of our major collaborators in the Digital Library is the Newton Project, which has been producing highly detailed transcriptions of Newton's manuscripts since 1998. Many of those manuscripts are held in Cambridge, so that's the kind of, I suppose, the root of our collaboration with them. And it's very much a text-based project. So over the years, they've produced thousands and thousands of pages of transcription, which look a bit like this. This is Newton's rather gory description of experimenting on his own eye to find out something about the nature of light and the refraction of light by essentially taking a wooden stick or a bodkin and then pushing it into the back of his eye. And then he inevitably also saw all sorts of strange things, colours, etc. These kinds of experiments, also Newton experimented with looking at the sun for a very, very long time without looking away, which essentially these kinds of things, he found out a lot, but it left him essentially blind towards the end of his life. But I suppose that the aims of the project, that they're a transcription project. Their aim is to produce text, readable, searchable versions of text, but also text for analysis. But you can see here that in a sense, what the aim, to a certain extent, without images, is to reproduce how the page actually looks. Whereas nowadays, I suppose that increasingly their transcriptions and other transcription producing projects, that increasingly these transcriptions are seen alongside images. And I think that what we hear from transcription producing projects is that this is changing the focus of their transcription away from this kind of facsimile driven attempt to create a faithful version of the page, and towards more kind of, I suppose, what you'd call semantic markup. So as Patty was just saying, those things like the encoding of names, the encoding of places, the encoding of linguistic features as a source of analysis rather than a source of kind of display. And it's this move, I suppose, away again from producing things which are going to end up in print to producing things which are going to end up online beside images themselves. One of the interesting areas here, I think, is it's brought up in these projects, the crossover between the two, the crossover between how things look and the kind of semantics of the text, in that display itself does have a semantic quality. So the way the text is laid out on the page is meaningful. So things like additions, which happen in particular places in the left margin or above, might be, you might encode them instead of just encoding display in left margin or display in a particular way. You might encode them as an addition or margin alias. So in a sense, the process of transcription becomes less neutral. You're making more assertions about what you think the actual layout of the page means in a semantic sense, rather than just how it looks. So, as well as having an effect on the intentions of producing text, increasingly we see images being used as a research tool in the production of text itself. I'm just going to go through a few examples which we've come across where images, particularly specialist images, is being used in interesting ways in order to create textual resources. So the first example is these kind of high resolution, ultra high resolution, deep zoom images. So this is an image of a map. It's actually a textile map of Myanmar from the 19th century. You can't really tell from looking at this image, but it's about 3 meters by 3 meters, and it's very, very fragile. So it's there is text on it, but it's almost impossible for researchers to kind of interact with that text using the physical object. So I suppose, just in a simple sense, you know, these kind of very high resolution images become then a tool for the access to, but also kind of analysis of text that you see. You are able to see the text, not only to read it, but to see it in a kind of in its physical context, in a way that it's very difficult to see in the original. So in the original object. So I suppose that what we're moving from is away from images just as representations of the things that they're images of. This kind of microscopic effect allows the image itself to become a research tool, which gives you different views onto text. I'll just go back to the presentation. I just took a screenshot in case the internet didn't work. And this kind of idea of image as a research tool becomes more significant as we go into more and more investigative imaging techniques. So multispectral imaging being one example. So this is an image of the Codex Zacynthus, which is a palimpsest. So it has text underneath and then a text on top. The text underneath is an 8th century copy of the Gospel of Luke. Sorry, the text underneath, and then the text on top is a 12th century lectionary of the New Testament. So there's 4 centuries between the original use of the manuscript and the reuse of it. So this is a reflected light image of that page, but then each image was then imaged many different times in a range of spectra by some people who came to the library with the specialist equipment. They spent about a month in a dark room in the hottest days of summer taking these images. It was a very heroic enterprise. But that then allows us to see, using images, a very different version of the object itself, and then allows us then to retrieve the text, which was done by the Institute for Scholarship and Electronic Editing in Birmingham, who are also collaborators of ours. So you can see, you go from here to here, where you can see the undertext, and then to a transcription. So again, it's the interaction between image and text is not simple, and in fact the images are becoming less simple because they're no longer what you'd think of as archival representations of objects. They're tending towards kind of creations, which their purpose is not to be accurate, the purpose is to give you different information. And then the last example in this particular thing about special imaging is 3D imaging. But not just 3D imaging in a simple sense. So this is an image of a Chinese oracle bone They're about 3,000 years old, and essentially they're bones, usually, I think, ox bones, and there are they would write predictions on them. They'd put them in a fire, and then they'd look at how the cracks cracked across the predictions, and then they would see whether the prediction was going to come true or not. Now, if you look at images of the Chinese oracle bones, that this one in particular is quite famous. The image, the text on the front is very well known. It's been transcribed and it's been studied. It allows us to actually, because it's about an eclipse, it allows us to date that bone very, very accurately. But if we just go here, and I hope this is going to work. So this is a 3D model of that bone, but it's not actually a simple 3D model. The bone itself doesn't really look like this. It's taken with raking light, with lots and lots of manipulation to increase the contrast, and then allows us to examine this very old and very fragile thing, because you wouldn't really be able to do this with the real thing. And this specialist imaging then reveals new texts on surfaces which hadn't been studied by original scholars. So you can see that the very first thing the scholars did, the academics did when they saw this, is they looked at the top, and because of the manipulation, they were able to see this whole new text here. So imaging is not just, I suppose, in support of text. It's not just there to show you what the page looks like or what the thing looks like. It actually can allow us to create new text, to get new insights into texts. So those are all, I suppose, examples of interactions between images and text on a small scale, on an object by object scale. More interesting, I suppose, more recent is the idea of using images at scale, so using many, many, many different images. And this is where IIIF comes in. So IIIF is a standard method of describing and delivering images over the web. It's very widely used by institutions who hold and service collections of images. And I'll just quickly show you how it works. So essentially you get a URI, which brings up an image. The way the URI is constructed is standard. So as long as you know the identifiers, you should be able to pull up images not just from Cambridge, but from Oxford or the British Library or from Manchester or from any number of other institutions. So it allows you to retrieve images programmatically, but then when you have the image, it also allows you to, just by changing the way that you call it up, and I'll just edit this URI. To call, without going through a website or anything, just interacting directly through the image, to call up different parts of the image, to call up the image at different rotations, and to, importantly for processing images, to call up different versions of the images, so black and white or whatever. And the important thing about IIIF isn't just that it allows you to do this with one institution's images, but that you can predictably do that with large amounts of images from very many different institutions. So if you look at these URIs here, the one at the top is a Cambridge one, the one at the bottom is a Manchester one, and you can see that apart from the identifiers and the kind of prefix, both are formatted in exactly the same way. So it allows you this kind of predictable programmatic access to images. Now this is a pretty horrible, oops, let's go back. Pretty horrible looking slide. And this is just an example to show you how you then find out where those images are. The references to these images are grouped together in these things, which are manifests, which provides a metadata and allow you to iterate through the images in an item. So for instance, all of the images in one of Newton's manuscripts. I'm just going to start this again because I lost my mouse, but if we just scroll through. And the essential idea of this is it's not for you to read, and that's why it's for a machine to read. And that's why it looks so horrible, and that's why it's useful for machines, not for humans. But that tells you something about AAAF, is that it's designed for machines to be able to interact with images at scale. Now, this can be used for comparing images, so you can draw together 4 different pages from the Gutenberg Bible, held in different places, held on different image servers very easily, and also to aggregate images. I'll just skip over this, but to bring together images from different institutions on a theme very easily. But in a sense, those 2 things are just different ways of looking at images yourself with your eyes, I suppose, as a human. But the real power of things like AAAF is the ability to analyze images at scale. So just a few examples of things we're working on with AAAF, one of which is generating text through handwriting recognition technology. These are the notebooks of Oliver Rackham, who was a famous botanist who went around the country essentially recording where he was, the date and the species he found in all kinds of different places over about the course of 60 years. All of that information is very interesting and important, but it's all locked down in the images. It would be a massive transcription project, and even if you were going to apply handwriting recognition technology in a traditional sense, it would involve so many files of massive images that it would be pretty difficult to do. What AAAF allows handwriting recognition technology to do is very quickly iterate through and call up not only the images, but different versions of the images, to manipulate them, to put them in black and white, to increase the contrast, etc., so that they are ready for handwriting recognition technology, and you can get text out of it at scale in a very much easier way, I suppose. The second project we're currently working on is generating information about text. So this again is Newton's, these are Newton's manuscripts, and we're looking at examining watermarks in Newton's archive, which is scattered all over the place and neither well organized chronologically nor dated very much. And in fact, Newton was a bit of an unreliable witness in his own archive, and often later on went back and dated things, the theory goes, in order to establish that he had the idea first. So you can't even trust the dates in Newton's archive, because sometimes he's gone in and kind of put them in retrospectively to try and establish some kind of primacy. So the idea is that we can take this scattered and jumbled archive and using AAAF, iterate through that archive at scale through all the different repositories it's in, and by grouping together material which shares a watermark, get some sense of the organisation of Newton's archive. And also with Darwin's papers, you can do it in a slightly different way. You have the same problem, very large archive, most of which is in Cambridge, but some of which is elsewhere, and not either organised or very few pages dated, and not organised chronologically. But there is an idea, because Darwin wrote on this blue paper and bought it in batches, and I think you might just be able to see that the batches of paper he bought are all very, very slightly different shades of blue. The idea is that you can reassemble Darwin's archive back into the batches of paper he bought, and then kind of create a sequence of those batches by dating one thing in each batch, and kind of create an archaeological layer of Darwin's papers, and therefore, you know, the order in which he had his ideas, assuming that he only used one batch of paper at a time. But that's an assumption worth testing. So to come back to text briefly at the end. So AAAF already helps us with some aspects of digital text creation analysis, but I think the really exciting thing here is the idea of applying some of the principles, same principles of AAAF to text. So to as people have done with images, to allow to create a standard way of accessing texts or parts of texts in all the different repositories where texts are held, so that you can predictably and programmatically go through and retrieve text in various different ways, in order to feed it into text, into analysis, into software, essentially. So we've done a little bit of work on this. My mouse keeps disappearing, so I'm just going to go back in again on this in Cambridge. If you can imagine that, forget about this first part of the URI, which is a bit ugly. If that just said something like Cambridge text, what this should allow us to do, and we've only done this internally so far in an experimental way for our own purposes, to feed text into the digital library. But here's, it allows you to retrieve a page of text, in this case, something from Newton's manuscripts. But by altering the URI in the same way, you should be able to, and a machine should be able to then predictably call up all of the pages in that manuscript, and feed that into some kind of the kinds of things Patty was talking about, natural language processing or some other kind of analysis. And if we go back and just try, another one, you can see that simply by changing the identifier, then you're paging through another manuscript, again retrieving text. And texts of various different kinds. So here's a transcription of an early Quran. So the idea is that if there was a general agreement that that institutions like ours made text available in this way, and if there was some kind of content negotiation, so you could retrieve this text not just as HTML but also as, say, XML or plain text. And also, perhaps, if you could extend it in the same way as has been done with images, not just to retrieve pages, but to retrieve chapters or paragraphs or other kind of semantically meaningful parts of text, then you could move to doing the same kinds of things with text as you could with images, and you could kind of open up that world of automated approaches to text across institutional boundaries in a way which would make that kind of text analysis stuff really take off. And that's it from me. And those are just my contact details.